So this presentation is called Growing Old in the Margins, Life Among the Institutionalized Elderly Poor of Lima, Peru. As Tim said, my name is Magdalena Segarra Chiapori, and I hold a PhD in anthropology from the University of Michigan. I defended my dissertation last year. Could you switch the slide, please? So this talk is based on my fieldwork, my dissertation fieldwork, which were 24 months of ethnographic fieldwork at La Merced shelter with institutionalized elder adults. La Merced is not the real name of the institution, but I cannot say the real name because of security issues. So I aim to show you, as Tim already said, the life works of one of the most invisible, unmapped, and understudied populations of Peruvian society, who are the urban elderly poor. And I want to focus on the fractures, intricacies, and subtleties of their everyday survival at the end of life in the context of, as we will see, precarious care, institutional neglect, and emotional deprivation. And in order to do so, I will focus on three things. First, the condition of family abandonment that many residents live and struggle with. Second, the kind of care they receive from the institution. And third, the relationships of friendships or bonds that they establish, that some residents establish among each other to fight loneliness and isolation. So next slide, please.
Okay.
So, wait.
Whoops.
No, you have to go to back. Yeah. No, one more back. There. Yeah. Okay, so a little bit about myself so you have a chance to know a little bit about me. I first studied literature in Peru, where I grew up. Then, as Tim said, I had a lot of questions about religion and theology, so I decided to pursue a master in theology at Harvard Divinity School. And when I came back to Peru, I encountered a difficult family situation. I grew up with my grandfather, my mother, and my sisters, so I had a very close relationship to elderly people since I was a little girl. And my grandfather was like my father. So he suddenly got ill, he was very old and he got into the hospital. There was a negligence in the hospital. And at the end, he came out of the hospital. We were able to take him home, but he was not the same. So he was basically bedridden and he had tubes in several parts of his body. So it was very difficult for us to encounter that situation. And it was the first time I actually thought to myself, what does care mean? What does it mean to care for someone you love? And what are the struggles of this? So my grandfather, he was fortunate enough or privileged enough to be a doctor in Peru. So he has his savings and his earnings, right? So we could afford a palliative care for him. He could have doctors at home or nurses basically, nurses that change shifts and everything. So he was always comfortable. He had his medicine, everything. But I started thinking to myself, so, okay, my grandfather is a privileged man in this country and he can have access to this. But how do the most vulnerable people in Peru, the people that don't have anything, right? The people who migrated from the Andes, the empleadas, the vendedores ambulantes, that's the vendors in the street, how do people that are vulnerable economically and socially provide themselves care? So this is a question that started to get into my head. And it was a moment when my personal interest aligned with my academic interests. And I decided I realized I found the topic of study I wanted to pursue. So I went to some volunteer in some hospitals of Peru, National Hospital, Rebagliati National Hospital, and also in a shelter in a urban marginal neighborhood of Lima in Manchay. And I was there for a year, in the two places. And as a consequence of this, I realized that it was urgent to study old age because it's really necessary to guarantee that people grow old with dignity, with humanity, and especially with rights in this country. So next slide, please. So La Merced and institutionalization. La Merced is, as you can see here in the picture, this is the main ward seen from the street. It's a very big institution, and this is the main ward. In the next picture, you're gonna see it from the inside, but besides the main ward, there are also other little wards. So the main ward has like 4 floors and around 30 rooms in each floor. And then at the back of the main ward, there are other 10 wards. And these 10 wards have 2 floors and 15 rooms each. Next slide, please. So this is the 4 floors of the central pavilion. As you can see, it's kind of deteriorated. The walls are not painted, it's kind of not in a very good well taken care state. No. Next slide. This is, for example, a rear garden of the shelter in a withered state. They were gardens. This shelter was founded, as I will tell you, in 1982, but now it's very dilapidated, and that's the kind of scenery you will see, right? These rear gardens, people hanging their clothes from the trees and things like that. Next slide, please. This is, for example, Ward 3, and you can see the wither gardens behind the window. That used to be one resident who had lived in Ward 3 for she was there 20 years. She told me that before this, there was a garden and there were flowers and everything, but with the deterioration of the shelter, it had become all wither and just terrain, no garden. And next slide, please. So this is, for example, a dilapidated wall in Ward 10. Ward 10 was basically the ward where the people who were bedridden and very, very old stayed. As one of the doctors told me, joking, but it was not really funny, he said to me, "Oh, in Ward 10 are the people that are with 1 foot here and 1 foot on the other one," meaning they're dying, So it's a very dilapidated ward. The institution doesn't invest much resources in making it look nice and be a nice place to be around. It's very deteriorated. Next slide, please. So I will tell you now a little bit of La Merced. La Merced is one of the 46 accredited elderly residential care centers by the Peruvian Ministry of Women and Vulnerable Populations. And the law 3490, which is in Peru the law for the elderly, defines a residential care center as a public or private space accredited by the state, where comprehensive and specialized care services are provided for older adults in accordance with their care needs. So some centers are gerontological. That means that the people that reside there can do certain activities. Others are geriatrical. That means that people are not able to do their tasks, and some are mixed. And in the case of the Merced, it's a mixed institution. You can find people that can take a shower, clean their clothes, clean their room, and you will find people that are bedridden with tubes and things, in a very deteriorated state. La Merced is a charitable organization that was founded in 1982, and during the 80s, the recently opened institution was actually seen as the benchmark for care of the elderly in Lima. Many people place their hopes of aging with social protection in La Merced, but today, 40 years later, La Merced faces a dramatic period of decline due to lack of funding, administrative corruption, and of course, the impacts of COVID-19. And at the time of my fieldwork, which was between 2017 and 2019, La Merced housed approximately 335 elderly adults who came from several marginalized sectors of the city and of the country. So it was a big place. There was a lot of people there. As you have seen from the pictures, La Merced shelter is a dilapidated facility, a place where, according to academic analysis, precarity registers on the census. This difficult, dilapidated, precarious place poses a challenge to its residents because many of them told me it was heartbreaking to endure institutionalization living in such a deteriorated environment. And finally, just a little note on why people come to La Merced. Well, people come to La Merced for many reasons. some people cannot financially support themselves in old age. So they lack health, employment, or some pension that can provide them financial security. Other people do not have social network or lack someone who can care for them. But most of the times, it's a combination of both. People come to Merced because their family cannot take care of them, and because they are people who have been living on the margins all their lives, right? Doing precarious jobs and having precarious lives. So when they reach old age, they see this institution as a place where they can have some shelter or some refuge instead of being living in the streets of Lima that are very unkind. And next slide, please, Tim. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the methodology of how I did my study. In the screen, you see a message. It's written by one of the residents, and it says, "Knowing to grow old is the biggest of the wisdoms and one of the most difficult chapters in the great art of living." This was written by a resident who was always very active and very reflexive. He was always very active in the institution. So next slide, please. So basically, when I went to the institution, my aim was to be one of the people there. You know, I wanted to be one more of them. I tried and I did significant bonds with many of the elderly. I let me touch by their stories and also allowed them to know me, because I didn't want to go to a place to extract information and then, go somewhere else and write a book. And, what about the people that are your interlocutors, right? So I always made sure that I was telling them what I was thinking about, what I was thinking I was going to write about, if I could share their stories, of course, with pseudonyms and all that. So I was always kind of letting the residents know where my work was directing at. I participate from their lives. I was there with them, watching TV, having lunch, going to mass, going on walks. I had the opportunity to be very close with some people who were dying and was there in their transit. Also, about methodology itself, at the beginning, I thought I could do interviews, but then I realized that when I did interviews and I asked if I could record the people, they felt very insecure. They don't like the interviews. So I figured out that it would be better to just have informal conversations. And in those informal conversations, I learned a lot of what was important for them. There was sort of a lot of listening from my part, and I let people just talk. And then when I had certain panorama of what was happening, I started delimiting certain topics and focusing on certain issues, etc. No, so basically my methodology was participative observation plus informal conversations plus being there plus accompanying the elderly day to day and forging bonds of respect and friendship that I can say happily last to today. That's nice. Next slide, please, Tim. Okay, so in order to show you the lives of the institutionalized elderly of Lima in Peru, I will focus in three things, as I said. The family abandonment many residents live, the care they are provided with in the institution, and the bonds of friendship and, relationships, meaningful relationships they build with each other to fight the impacts of institutionalization. So first, I'm going to focus in family abandonment. Next slide, please. So family abandonment, this is, you see there a text. It says, in English, it translates, "You're not alone, you have us." This is some souvenir that was done by the staff for the elderly. On a special occasion, I think it was the anniversary of the shelter, so the staff made some souvenirs for the elderly. But basically, we can go to the next slide. There was a common claim about many of the residents I met in this institution, and it was, "I have been abandoned, I have been abandoned, I have been abandoned, I have been abandoned." So I started to say to myself, okay, what does abandonment mean? How do they frame abandonment? How do they think about it? Next slide, please. So I start talking to people, and I start discovering that the claim of saying I have been abandoned meant especially by my family. And it meant several things, like nobody comes to see me, like my relatives don't visit me, they don't come to visit me, and they don't see me, they don't call me. Some other older adults said things like they have deposited me here and forgot about me. And it was very sad because several people felt like their lives lack any meaning, because they were just like a package sent to this institution, and they felt it that way. And family never came or never called or rarely called, but it was not enough, because people were actually really long for affection. They were longing for being listened, for attention, for being seen, to feel that their lives matter. There was a strong desire in these residents to feel that their lives were not irrelevant. And the residents have a theory about abandonment. And they usually said to me, oh, people here, yeah, they say they die because she had a heart attack, or because she had cancer, or he had diabetes. But mostly what kills people here is sadness. So people used to think that the sadness that was produced by abandonment was what killed people. This abandonment permeated one's life, and you got so used to it that you start thinking things like, I remember one resident telling me, why would I live? Because nobody comes to see me, nobody cares about me, I don't have a family. If I had someone who loved me and who called me and who cared about me, it would make sense for me to be alive. But in these conditions, I don't think it's worth it, So it was in that sense, it was a difficult field work. It was very emotionally difficult for me to be there, and I don't have I know I'm not a psychologist, right? So I was not trained to deal with these things I was told. So I decided the best thing I could do was just be there with people, hanging out with people, listening to them, making them talk if they wanted to talk, or things like that. And next slide, please, Tim. So one of the questions I had was, why does family abandonment happen? And I think this is some of the issues we were talking at the beginning of the presentation. I believe Biehl asked this. So first of all, family abandonment happened because of three things. I detected three things happening. The first one was poverty. So as families see themselves constricted by an economic order that fosters job instability and chronic poverty, they are pushed by their adverse social and economic circumstances into distancing themselves from elderly relatives because they cannot afford their care. And I was talking about Jessica Lina Weaver's article and how she points out that the act of disengaging from older relatives maybe seem morally problematic, but to some extent for younger families or younger family members, it is a survival strategy. So there were a lot of families that, for example, a man had daughters, and all the daughters worked in different jobs, so none of them could take care of him, and they had little money, they had their own families, so they couldn't afford, just the money wasn't there, the money wasn't there, so they just sent him to the institution. Another reason why family abandonment happened was, I discovered, was broken family bonds. So many people, or several of the residents I met, when they were younger, for example, and their parents died, they had these issues with inheritance, and they fought about the money, about the houses and things like that. And they decided to break relationships. So you found that in the institution, there were several people that have brothers or sisters or nephews, not sons or daughters, but they have fought with them, or they have broken ties a long time ago. So now in old age, they didn't want to reach to them and to tell them, I'm going through this difficult situation. Could you give me a hand, or things like that, no? And the third reason I found of family abandonment was the fact that some of the residents that were in the shelter actually finished in the shelter because they were carers themselves. So these older adults that I encountered in the institution actually cared for their parents or their mother or their grandparents, and they decided in a way, to resign to a life for themselves. They decided not to marry or to have children because they felt like it was their duty to take care of their family, of their parents. So they grew old, their parent grew older, and at the end, the parent died, and they stayed like they had been made alive. They didn't have family themselves, so they thought, and they didn't have good jobs either. So they saw going to an institution as the best possible option. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the care that is provided at the institution. This picture that you see is a ward, I think it's called, where people who are undergoing medical difficulties in the shelter go. So the elderly that are very fragile or are very sick go to this place. It was, as you can see, kind of precarious, not very well equipped. So that's basically one of the characteristics of care in the institution. Next slide, please. For example, there you see a wheelchair, right? So this institution, as I told you before, and maybe you have already an idea about it, is an institution where resources were always cut short. There was always a lack of resources. So, for example, for people who couldn't have wheelchairs, they would fabricate wheelchairs in the institutions like this, from a plastic chair and a couple of wheels, So basically, care was precarious as the institution means that it was not provided with the best resources. The institution didn't have lots of resources or a good amount of resources to provide the best care to its residents. And you can see this specifically in the practice of physically restraining residents. So there's a lot of debate in some literature, of nursing literature, for example, whether physical restraint may be used or not. But in the institution, it was used. The problem is that it was not used with adequate supplies. So the institution was so poor that they didn't have specific things to hold people. So they tied people with long scarves or wraps of cloth. It was very problematic. And the elderly would have some would have lacerated their wrists and their ankles. So it was a challenge for me, definitely, to see that. And when I asked nurse technicians why did they restrain people, they told me, well, we don't have enough staff. We have like one person for 20 residents, so it's impossible for me to be aware of the 20 residents at the same time. So the best security measure I can think of is tying them up. And this was like a philosophy in the shelter. This was like how people do things. And because of this happening, right, they were unmet expectations between residents and what the staff offered. So residents usually were looking for a kind of care that was compassionate, solidary, empathetic, with respect, with what in Spanish we will call cariño, that is affection. We have to think that these are people that almost all of them have no one in the world. So a gentle touch, a smile can mean anything, and people wanted that. But unfortunately, because of the precarity and because of the lack of staff and all these things, everybody was running out of time, and everything was so fast that the care that people actually provided was sometimes rude, uncompassionate, and feeling. It was not the kind of care residents actually wanted. Of course, there was some staff that were more careful and treated residents with more affection and more delicacy and more care. They approached them like human beings in their complete sense, not just the bodies that needed to be changed the diaper or take a bath or eat their food, but it was a very nuanced process. It was not black or white. Care was not black or white. It had a lot of shades in between. What I concluded from seeing the care, being a witness to the care that was given in the institution, was that Peru is not yet a country where a culture of care prevails, right? And I think we have seen this also in other countries with the rise of the pandemic, right? We don't live yet in a society of care. And basically, staff managed to provide care however they could due to precarity. I already said that. Next slide, please, Tim. And now this is the last part. Then I'm going to go to the conclusions. I'm going to talk a little bit about the bonds and friendships that established among some residents. So we have to take into consideration that La Merced housed 335 residents, but they were very different residents within the institution. I mean, there were some residents that were totally deprived of anything. They didn't have a pension, they didn't have family, they didn't even know how to read and write. There were other residents that the ones you see here in the picture that had gone to school or I don't know, had better clothes, so it was a very diverse place, socially speaking. And that made it also difficult for some people to establish bonds. Basically, the bonds that are established were among people that were similar. So basically, people, for example, Catholic people will gather together and would pray. Evangelicals would also do the same, But if you were not similar to the rest, there was some kind of, how do you say this word in English? Not confidence, like they didn't trust you, right? So it was very difficult to establish bonds. But when bonds actually established, it was very interesting because, next slide, Tim. Because when people connected, I told you this was a difficult place socially talking, no? But some people decided to build bonds of friendship to fight the difficulties of institutionalization, right? So institutionalization was really hard. Many people were not allowed to leave the institution. Many people didn't receive any visitors or any calls. So when they found somebody that was like them or had a similar background or had similar interests, they connected. And in this sense, the institution, with all its decrepitude and dilapidation and difficulties, it became actually a latitude for new opportunities and relationships for people. Despite everything, people find ways to effectively and socially endure. Bonds were forged, and there was a circulation among people of affection, of friendship. People felt that they belonged to some place. They felt even at home, I had the opportunity to meet, how do you say, a couple, a wife and a husband, and they entered to the institution in 2013, and they met an old lady there that had entered to the institution way before them, and she was even older than them. But the couple, they weren't able to have children when they were young, so they didn't have any children. And they decided to adopt this woman who was even older than them, and they took care of her. They ate together and they cut her food. They made sure she had food for the afternoon. They prayed with her. The wife taught her how the beads go in the rosary. The wife will also give her advice on things like, don't fight with those people, don't get into that, be at peace, things like that. No, she was like a counselor, like a person who listened to her plight, and it was very interesting because this couple was experimenting maternity and paternity in old age and in the midst of institutionalization, right? So this was something totally unexpected for them. And for the lady, her name was Clarita. She also told me, something like, I remember she telling me that she loved this. She called the couple her papitos. Papitos is like daddy and mommy in translation in English, and it comes with an affective tone, right? So she usually told me that she loved these people because she had always been an orphan. And in old age, when she didn't imagine this happening, she found a father and a mother that actually care about her, and listened to her and gave her affection and made her life meaningful, right? She no longer felt alone. Next slide, please. Yes. So now I'm going to go to the conclusions. I don't know if somebody has any question or we address the questions later. How do we do?
We'll wait till questions at the end, okay?
Okay, cool. Okay, so my conclusion is basically, why is it important to study old age in Peru? In the particular context of Peru, we have to say that 12.7% of the population are older adults, and the number keeps rising. This is information from the National Institute of Statistics of 2020. So currently, these populations faces several difficulties in guaranteeing growing old with quality of life and exercising their rights. The services offered to this population are very deficient, especially regarding health, pension, and education. So the old in Peru are really invisible. They're an invisible population. We have to acknowledge them because people have to age. I don't want to say successfully, but people have to age with dignity, right? Have to age being able to enjoy in bonds of comradeship or friendship or affection, having a decent living, you know, having the opportunity to cure them if they have a disease, you know. The percentage of older adults will increase actually. And there would be not enough services to satisfy these demands. Currently, there aren't any there's not enough services to satisfy these elderly population demands. So services and infrastructures are not prepared for what's coming. And it is already difficult to make sure people age with dignity. How would it be in the future when they are more elderly people? So now the panorama or the scenario is kind of critical, right? And we have seen this also with the pandemic. All the infrastructures broke down, and in Peru especially, they broke down really bad. I think Peru was one of the countries with the highest highest death per capita. I don't something.
Mortality rate.
Yes, and most of them were elderly people, no? So in my dissertation, one of my conclusions is that we need to build a culture of care. Like a post-COVID society can be one where there is a revolution of care. And this means cares for all, humanized care, restorative care, for those, especially for the people who have always lived in the margins. And the next slide, please. So this revolution of care, I argue, should aim to achieve social and economic equity. We need to put to work solidarity mechanisms backed by the institutionality of our political systems. That is the only way no one is going to be left behind. And living in a society or culture of care goes beyond the field of health and illness. It implies a holistic view that contemplates not only satisfying biomedical needs, but also having access to education of quality, dignifying jobs, the possibility of a decent pension, and of course, the opportunity of receiving affection, having bonds, having a social environment, having friends, and all of that. So from the most subtle and private gestures to the most global public policies, I believe that living in a culture of care will demand and that new hope is deposited in the collective and that we value the lives of the others. We have to start seeing the others like we see ourselves, right? Or like we see our family, not as strangers, not as aliens, but as people who matter, right? We have to be able to put in the shoes of others. And the next slide just says, thank you. So thank you very much for your time, for being here, for listening to me. I appreciate this a lot. It means a lot to me.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Magdalena. Obviously, you're very involved and excited about your research, and it's very, very interesting. And I, for one, am very interested in your what you experienced and what your findings were. And it's nice to find someone who's quite young to be interested in the problems of the elderly. Okay, so and perhaps that's not very common anymore. You know, it used to be that the elders were seen as people who had a lot of knowledge and were respected in many societies, but that seems to be getting to be less and less common as our society as the world becomes globalized and a globalized Western culture seems to dominate, at least in terms of our point of view. Not being in China, I don't know what, or speaking Chinese, I don't know what it might be there. But I see some of the same issues going on in China, for example. But before I dominate all the comments, let me open up the floor to anybody who'd like to ask some questions of our presenter today.
Yes. Yes.
Bill?
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 Yeah, thank you very much for your talk. One of the things I was I'm interested in is, one, how is the place funded, right? Who funds it? I'm also interested in if you did any work with the staff to see what their conceptions, their cultural suppositions. And the other thing, element to all of this is how did people get into this place? Because I can imagine it as being much better than the street, right? Yes. And I've worked with people in Peru that monolingual Quechua speakers who were so poor on the coast, right? They would have I imagine they'd have a hard time getting into it, right? Mm-hmm. So all of these questions boil up in my head.
Sure, yes.
But thank you.
No, thank you. About how the institution is funded, La Merced is a shelter that is funded by another institution that is the Lima Benevolent Society. In Spanish, it would be called La Beneficencia de Lima. Okay, so this institution, this Lima Benevolent Society, has different, they call them social projects. Okay, so they have shelters for orphan children. They have shelters for elderly adults. They have popular, I don't know the word in English, comedores populares.
Communal kitchens.
Communal kitchens. They have schools, okay? And they are funded because they receive donations from people with a lot of money in Lima. They are also funded through the Lima Benevolent Society administers a lottery that is very popular in Peru called La Tinca. So they did a, convenium, like a sort of
agreement.
Mm-hmm. Agreement, yes.
An agreement, yeah.
An agreement. And some of the earnings from the lottery go to the Lima Benevolent Society to take care of these different social projects. And they also fund themselves because the Lima Benevolent Society is an old institution. I believe it was founded in the 19th century. So it had a lot of properties in Lima downtown, okay, where when the city was smaller, it was reduced to downtown. So it has a lot of properties there that now are devaluated, but actually are worth a lot of money. Yeah. So now the Lima Benevolent Society is pursuing this logic of getting rid of the invaders. Like a lot of invaders have been living in their properties. So they're getting rid of their invaders and they are furnishing again and putting pretty houses and everything. So they are renting them and they are getting money to support their projects. So I believe that's your first question, right? Your second question was about the staff. Yes. So about the staff, my experience was really crazy because when I was just starting my field work, I was seen with a lot of suspicion by the staff. And think that I am a white woman in Peru in a mestizo country, and most of the ladies that take care of the elderly were mestizo women or Andean women, right? That they have their own difficulties themselves in their houses, and they have a really, when I start talking to them, they told me, we feel exploited, they pay us nothing here for a job that is so demanding and so hard, and we are paid later, never, or whatever. So the staff at the beginning saw me with a lot of suspicion. They confessed to me that they told me that they thought I was being sent by the institution to spy on their jobs and see if they were doing their job good. So I would say she's not doing a good job, and they would quit her,
Be fired.
Fire her. So it was very, very difficult at the beginning to engage with him because nobody wanted to talk to me. I was like, no. And I started started being in Ward 10, and I noticed that they had a lot of work. So I said to them, if you need some help, I can help. So they said, okay. And at the beginning, always with suspicion, they told me, okay, give this food to this resident. So I will go and feed the resident. And in those moments where I was doing their job, I definitely acknowledge how difficult it was. Even the fact of pushing the food and laying your back, and all of that was so much effort. And doing that for, I don't know, 8 hours, 10 hours, that's really a lot. But at the end, I got the chance to make very good friends with some of the staff. And I remember I remain close to them. And what was the third question? I don't remember.
About how do people get into this institution, and how many people are out there who can't get into such an institution?
Yeah, so
the olvidados.
The olvidados, yes.
Yeah.
So together in the institution, actually, there are certain conditions. You have to be in good health, okay? You have to be over 65, and you have to prove that you don't own a house, you don't have family, that you're alone, okay? So if you comply with those 3 requirements, your case is passed to a board, and they evaluate, then they interview you, and if they think you meet all the requirements, they accept you. But it must be said that when I was doing my fieldwork, La Merced shelter is a shelter that was founded for elderly people who didn't have means to support themselves in their old age, but not for people with mental problems or things like that. And when I was doing my research, the Beneficencia, the Lima Benevolent Society, had made an agreement with Municipality of Lima to transfer several older adults to this institution, and these older adults were people that suffer from mental illness. They had this complication. So many of the residents that already lived there, they were like, oh no, why do they come here? They shouldn't be coming here. They were very they despised them a lot. They a lot of difference towards them, so it was a very tense environment. But so yes, you have to comply with certain requirements, but it is true that sometimes agreements are made and people just come into the institution in big, I don't know how it's, groups of people, no? And well, about the olvidados, yes, there's a lot of people in the street in Peru, yes, of course. Older people, yes, but it's interesting because sometimes you ask them, when I was doing my fieldwork, I had a chance of having some friends telling me, there's this old lady in this street, in this corner of the street. Could you go and see if she wants to go someplace to the institution? And I would go and I would ask her, well, I tell her who I am. I was doing field research in this shelter, that there she could even at least have a meal or a bed. We know it was not the best quality, but it was better than nothing. And some people will usually tell me things like, no, I don't want to lose my freedom. I rather live on the streets than lose my freedom, because they know that institutionalization is what Erving Goffman sort of described in his books, right? Like following different patterns, making things at certain time. It's a monotony of things, right? And people, I encountered in the institution a woman that had been taken there against her will to the institution, and she was always trying to escape. So it was there were a lot of, ways to see it, no?
It's kind of like the homeless in the United States. Many don't want to go into homeless shelters for the same reason.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't know that. Yeah, similar.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. No problem.
No, go ahead. Anyone else have a question or comment? Because I do. let me, so if the situation is like this in Lima, how would it be in places like Ayacucho or, in rural areas of the city?
Yes,
I
yes.
think that would be, that seems to be a significant issue. So do you know if there's a similar kind of residential care facilities for the indigent, the poor in the areas outside of Lima?
Yes, I don't have personal direct experience working in shelters in other regions away from Lima, but I have colleagues and they have told me that the situation is just horrible, that sometimes, I mean, Jessica Lina Weaver also has an article or about a shelter in Ayacucho, but they said to me things like my colleagues, she was working for the Ministry of Vulnerable Populations and she was doing a research on elderly people living in the not the capital, the other cities, and she said something like, you encountered that they actually like kidnap older adults and put them in the institution, and sometimes they would even like put them like injections and sleep them and transport them to these institutions, and then the elderly will wake up and they would never know where they were. So there was a lot of transgressions of rights, several. It was really bad. There are some institutions across the country, yes, but I haven't been there. I haven't seen nothing, so I don't really know. I just know what I told you. But it's again the same, right? It's the elderly treated like they don't care. It doesn't care. It doesn't matter what happened to them. They're objects, and their humanity that is lost. That people don't care about that.
Thank you. Carrie, you have your hand up, and then Rick next.
Oh, thank you. I found this very interesting.
Thank you.
Ms. Zagata, Dr. Zagata. And it raises the larger question for me of the rest of the world. Peru is not unique. There must be many other countries who are in similar situations. I'm thinking of Central Africa, for example, and parts of Southeast Asia. So that's a larger context we're not even really thinking about. Yes. My specific question is, you mentioned, you did answer it. There's a specific age, 65. Is that it when this technically starts off? Because that's the age that we use in the United States too.
Yes. In Peru, it's 60, but yeah, it's 60. At 60, you're considered a senior or an older adult, okay? But I think that in other countries, it's 65. In the US, it's 65. Yes.
So it is 60 there.
Yes.
I didn't catch that. Thank you very much. That's earlier. And we're having debates now about increasing the age for retirement in this country, pushing it to 70. Although some countries, France, for example, and others have much earlier retirement ages. So thanks for triggering off something on a topic that you almost don't hear about much anymore, other than in the formalities of involvement through social security and so forth. Thank you.
Sure, thank you.
Okay. Rick and then Dylan. Okay, Rick.
Just a comment, not a question, but as you were talking, and particularly with the question about what happens outside of Lima, I was reminded that my daughter did her doctoral field work in a community called Alcara in Ayacucho. And but she was dealing with the opposite end of the spectrum. She was focusing on children and the enculturation and the formal education of children. I can't say an awful lot about that. It was her area, not mine. But my impression was that they put a good deal of effort and attention into taking care of the children and trying to ensure that they had a reasonable education. Sometime it might be interesting for you and my daughter to be in communication and compare notes about the two ends of the spectrum.
Sure, yes, and it's very interesting what you mentioned because, as I explained before, the Lima Benevolent Society has also shelters for the orphans. I don't know, like for little children that don't have parents. And when I visited this place, it was a totally different situation. Like, it was beautiful, and there were gardens, and there were games, and there were colors, and there were paintings in the wall, and the children were happy, and they were playing, you know. So it was totally different than the environment that I encountered in the shelter for the elderly that was administered by the same institution. So that tells at least it tells me a lot of how you face ages, right? How you make differences and what you think has to be old age and has to be earlier years. No, it talks a lot about that.
Okay, Dylan, and then Jay, and then Herb. Dylan?
I just had a comment about the age in the United States. So in Burlington, like today, my task, I work at a public library, and I was calling around like on the community services brochure that we hand out to homeless people and stuff like that. It's actually it may be retirement at 65, but like the adults home where older populations can go if they have no home or no one to help care for them. It's actually 60 in our county, so it's pretty similar to what she was saying about Peru. So I just had a small comment about that. So here you can enter into the adult home at 60 plus, not 65 plus.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thanks, Dylan.
Thank
Jay, and then Herb.
Yeah, just a couple of observations. I really enjoyed the presentation.
Thank you.
And so I guess my first most pressing question, I work in environments like the one that you described with older adults in subsidized housing who have very limited income in the Northeast United States. And I was just wondering whether you could tell us a little bit more about the public face of your work, because you've been writing for media, I'm assuming you are trying to promote some of the concerns that you've seen through your research. So could you tell us about that and tell us what you think the responsibilities of anthropologists working in these environments are to go beyond the writing and both interviewing and the writing up of the materials for scholarly work consumption?
Sure. Yes. Well, first of all, I must say that they don't like researchers of the elderly. When I entered the institution where I was working at, I was not wanted there because I could see several things that were wrong. So it's not easy to research this topic because people close doors. So you don't see how they treat bedridden people, how they administer medication, and all these things that shouldn't go wrong that go wrong. So I have been writing, yes, I have a couple of articles and some op-eds and public writings. But so far, I mean, I wish I could get a postdoc so I could really invest time in writing my book and making this a contribution to public policy in Peru and other places of the government. Right now, this coming semester, I'm going to teach a course of anthropology of aging at my alma mater, which is Universidad Católica. I'm going to teach there a course in the Masters in Anthropology. But, you know, besides writing and, yeah, I did also a video that I'm going to I submitted to Sapiens and they're going to publish it soon. It's a video that follows the talking of one of the residents who says, how does it feel living in an institution like this? But I haven't been engaged. I mean, I have like a group of colleagues with who we work on publishing different articles or things like that. But there's very little activism on aging in Peru right now. I have been a couple of times to the Congress when they were trying to pass the legislation 30490, the law for the elderly, and it took ages. You know, congressmen didn't want to pass it, and we had to be there with other older adults as a group pressuring. And at the end, it passed, but the law is not well done according to people I talk to in the ministries and in the government. So it needs a lot to be fixed. But yes, right now I'm not very into activism right now. I'm trying to write, and maybe I should. But what I do, I do go to visit my friends, So I returned to the shelter where I was doing my research a couple of times to visit them. I lost many of them to the pandemic, but others survived. So I went back as soon as they opened the institution. This was like 2 months ago. They were really, really strict. And I went there and I visited them. I talked to them. Of course, I saw them. All their 2 years have passed. Some lost their sight. I also go to another shelter now where one of the residents from La Merced was. So she was moved to another shelter. So I go to this shelter and I visit her. She calls me and she tells me, when are you coming? I miss you. So I go, and I know, for example, that she likes to read. And in the institution where she is, there's nothing interesting to read. Sometimes the activities they make her do are painting drawings, and she thinks like that's an insult for her. No, so she told me, bring me this book by Vargas Llosa. Vargas Llosa is like a novel author of Peru. So I went last week and brought her the book, and she texts me because she has her smartphone. The book is amazing. Vargas Llosa was a total Don Juan, and she was really happy. So I do those kinds of things, I don't do research anymore, but I visit I call them my viejitos. Viejitos in Spanish would be my old fellows, and talk to them on the phone. Sometimes they need money for some stuff, so I send some money or things like that. I'm always connected. I don't want to lose the bond because they're so special, and they have shared like things of their lives that have been really difficult and very intimate, and that's very valuable to me. And I don't know if it's weird that an anthropologist gets too involved with the people she studies, but these are my family. I take care of them and I care for them and I want them to be good. Yeah.
So I just wanted to, that's a lovely answer, and I hope that every anthropologist among us does the same kind of thing with the people that we work with, visit and maintain connections and so on. But you are also, in that capacity, you are performing, quote, an intervention. You are providing something that you need, but also something that they need, which is companionship, intellectual stimulation, relationships with one another, things that they are having to create if they can on their own, but that I think it could be the anthropologist's role, if so desired, to develop in addition to the work that we do. Your work has pointed out that loneliness and isolation and lack of stimulation is central to their lives. For all the reasons you mentioned. And it's also central to the lives of the people that I work with. There are many kinds of approaches that are extensions of what you've done that could be developed and systematically expanded that are relatively low cost and probably would improve quality of life quite a bit, even if you can't do anything about the quality of service delivery directly. Just an observation.
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Jay. Herb?
Well, it's not Herb, it's actually Francie, the expert here.
Francine, okay.
Hi,
Francie, how you doing?
Fine, thank you. So as someone with degrees in both anthropology and clinical social work, I'm interested in diversity within the group, both religious observance, language, family organization, and how services to these people are adjusted or added, as well as preparation of the workers to work with the cultural differences. In addition, you speak about this particular institution as a place for impoverished people, and I'm wondering what kind of options are available to people who are more in the middle class or upper classes of this, and also how the male-female So it's a lot of questions there.
Yeah. Well, let's see if I remember all of them. Okay, so
I can help.
about you said something about the staff, so the preparation of the staff. You were interested in that. Well, I must say it's very sadly, but most of the women that work in these institutions go to Peru is a country where there's a lot of corruption, and one of the places where corruption has like landed, there's a lot of I don't know how you say,
Tentacles.
Huh?
Tentacles, like
Yes,
octopus.
tentacles, yes, tentacle, exactly, is education. So the last years, we have seen a huge increase of universities that don't follow there's an organ in Peru that follows that all the educational institutions meet the requirements adequate to offer you a degree in the name of the nation. So in the last years, many congressmen and ministers and people who want money have put their tentacles in education, and they build and inaugurate new universities. And these new universities actually do not meet the standards of a quality university, you know. But it's very complicated because they're cheaper than going to a university that does align to all these requirements. So many people go to these education centers that are bad because that's the only thing they can afford. Okay, it's very sad. That's the only thing they can afford. So they get admitted there and they study there. But the formation or the, I don't know, you would say like the preparation, you know, the education they receive is not the best. So you will find that some staff, I don't know, I mean, maybe it's something personal, you know, if I were an old person, I would like to be undressed, you know, with delicacy and that, you know, but some staff will be just rough and take the shirt and things like that, or they don't know how to do certain things. Even the fact of tying people with ropes or cloth wraps, you know, that's awful. But that's the condition of the staff. It's a mix of things. It's first, they cannot afford a good education. They go to these institutions where they provide them with bad education, and at the end, they discover that when they come out of the university, the nation does not recognize their title. So it's basically like estafa. How do you call that in English?
A what?
Estafa.
Oh, it's a scam.
It's a scam. It's a business that it's a scam. Okay. So that's the situation of the staff. Aside from that, of course, there's always people that are kind-hearted and, you know, take care of the elderly in good in nice ways. But most of the things they learn themselves on the floor. You know, they learn while they were working, when they were younger. So that's, I don't know if that answers your question regarding the staff.
Well, I was asking about diversity, not just within the staff, which I'm not clear about, but also within the group they're serving, linguistic, religious,
yes,
whatever. And also, you mentioned that this institution is for impoverished people, and I was wondering what kind of options are left for people, you know, like us, for example.
Yeah.
Let's go back to the diversity in the group first.
Okay. So about the diversity of the group, yes, there's definitely a lot of diversity. I mean, I encounter people that have been wealthy when they were young and they lost everything due to clinical depression or things like that. I met people that came from the Andes and didn't even speak Spanish, and nobody spoke Quechua there. So there was no way to communicate with these people. And when these persons were telling you, it hurts, you knew there was something wrong, but nobody spoke Quechua and they didn't bother bringing a translator, right? So that was something I saw once. But it was a very diverse place in sense of the social background of the people. Like I told you, they were people that were middle class, you know, and when they retired, the retirement pension was not enough for them to live on their own. So they went to this institution and they paid to this institution their pension, and they had a room, a food, care, and everything. They were other people that were very, very destitute, you know, people that they, I don't know how you say, that you bring from the street, literally living in the street in the midst of trash and in a very undignified way. No, there was people like that. For example, there was people, I already said this, that had privilege in the 60s, in Lima in the 60s, and they lost everything due to certain things. This woman had a depression and she lost her job and she lost everything. There was another man that also lost everything. Then they were people that were what we were calling Peru middle class, but low middle class, like people that, for example, had a little home and took care of their father and mother, and when their parents died, they had to sell the house to have something, and they went to the institution. There was also the diversity racially, right? So racially, no? There were some people that were coming from a more Peruvian white background. There were some people that were coming from the Andes, for example. There were people coming from the Amazon. Most of them spoke Spanish, aside from this man that I told you before. And in terms of religious, where they were in religious diversity, they were Catholics and they were evangelicals. So they were always fighting for there was always confrontation, like who has right to do their mass or who has right to do their activity. And it was very biased because the institution was always leaning towards the Catholic group, and the evangelicals didn't have much space to perform their rituals and their activities. And they were always mad about this, of course. But yeah, what else? In terms of linguistic, I just knew this case of this particular man that spoke Quechua and nobody understood him. But then everybody I met spoke Spanish or spoke bad Spanish. There were also diversity in terms of cognitive conditions, right? So there were people that were really functional doing their lives, you know. There were other people that were dealing with some disabilities, or they were having wheelchairs or things like that. So there was it was a very diverse panorama. And there's a third question, right? Which was?
Thank you.
Oh, okay.
The question was, where do people who are middle class go for their
So people middle class, it's kind of a difficult question because middle class in the US doesn't mean the same as middle class in Peru. But let's say that, I don't know, somebody like you would probably found if you would probably age with your family, with your husband, if you have children, with one of your daughters or one of your sons. But if none of them can take care of you, you would likely enter an institution. And of course, there are institutions for the wealthy as well. And I have been into one too. And the scenario is totally different, you know? It's like people are treated like queens and kings. It's a total different thing, you know. The vibe is totally different, and the infrastructure is totally different. The care they put, the activities they offer to the people, everything is different. So you would go to a place like that. That's something we thought to do with my grandmother, but at the end she wanted to stay home. But there's different levels, and you can go to a wealthy institution and they would treat you really well.
Okay, thank you, and for that comment. And Rick, did you have a comment, another statement, a question?
Yes, one question. You were talking a few minutes ago about the writing that you've been doing, and you were saying that you're not just writing academic papers, but you've been writing op-eds. You've been trying to bring this issue to the attention of a broader audience. And I was just wondering, what kind of response have you gotten? Are you reaching the people you want to reach? Has there been any movement, or are people not paying attention?
No, I don't think that much. You know, the only thing I received once was a lovely message from a professor in Germany that she told me that the piece I wrote in AES, that it's American Ethnology Society, she liked it a lot. She worked also with the elderly, And she said she was using it, the ethnographic examples I provided, she was using them in her classes because she really liked the writing. But besides that, like, for example, in Peru, nobody knows about these pieces, or I put them in my Facebook or my Instagram, but there's really no response. It's like, no, it's sad, but there's no response.
And so
There's
it's
no
hard to
movement.
make a difference.
Sorry?
So it's hard to make a difference.
Yes, it's really hard, especially in a country like this, you know, it's really hard. It's a challenge. And I'm thinking, like, when I'm older, maybe try to, I don't know, I have no experience at all with NGOs or things like that, but do something, right? More active than just thinking and elaborating theories, you know, to have an impact, a real impact on people's lives. And I still have to figure that out. But sadly, Peru is a country where if you don't have money, if you're not white, and if you haven't gone to a privileged education and center, you're forgotten. And it's very sad. It's very sad. And we have to change that somehow. I don't know how, but yeah.
Good luck to you.
Thank you.
Okay, Jim,
Yes.
Jim Weil.
Okay, yeah. Thank you, Magdalena, for your
Thank you.
really rich presentation. And it reminds me, and it's a testimony to the value of ethnography, because you're describing in such good detail for us one very specific place. And for that reason, I'm not worried right now so much about all the other needs that are not being met. It reminds us of other needs that are not being met. But here's a place that's meeting the specific needs of a finite number of people. And that's wonderful. And so building from there is what can be done. And it just occurred to me when you said that you were going to be teaching a course in the master's program, that I don't know where this division came from, but how we can recognize that, you know, applied anthropology is also doing pure research, but teaching is also a kind of applied anthropology, because it is making anthropology useful for the students who are learning from us and going out into the world. But here is a specific place with a specific need that is not quite so hard to meet, I think. The staff doesn't have time to do all of the nurturing, but I'm wondering if you're having the idea that as you teach this course, there's things like internships and service learning, that your students can go and spend time with these people and give them another younger person to talk to and to interact with. Is that something that you have on your agenda?
Yes, definitely. It's an idea, you know. I want the students that take my course become really aware of what's the reality of the elderly in Peru, especially of the elderly who don't have resources. And I mean, I don't think I could go back to the institution where I did my field work and present a project of bringing volunteers and things like that, because I really wasn't wanted there. They were always trying to kick me out because I was seeing all these things. But I could go to other places, or to, for example, shelters linked with the church or things like that, you know, and start forming people. You know, would you like to have an interlocutor, an older interlocutor, talk to somebody who's older than you, or make a special friendship, or a different kind of friendship, or meet a man that has the same interests that you have, that's just that he's 70 and you're 24, right? Intergenerationality is very important, right? And I would say, yeah, it's a good idea. And I would definitely try to encourage this to my students, because they will be supposedly interested in old age. And it's people that are doing their research in old age. It's in some place or in somehow around the country. So I could talk to them, and, you know, I have some connections, and I could put like a group of people to go volunteering. But I always say that volunteering is not just bringing balloons and cake and, you know, and games and putting I don't know the name in English, pelucas, witches,
Wigs.
wigs. Yeah, you know, and that's what I saw that people do there in the institution where I was. And many people told me, I feel like I feel insulted. I feel like I'm a child. I'm not a child. I don't need this. I don't need a party happening. I need somebody to talk to me, to sit with me, and let's talk about politics. Let's talk about what's going in the country right now. Let's talk about the war in Gaza. You know, people, they, I mean, they are thinking, they are here, right? They're here and they are aware of what's happening, you know, and they don't want cake and candies. They want to talk. They want to be treated like adults as they are. They're older, but they're adults, and they have total awareness of the lives that surrounds them and the politics that surrounds them, you know. So that would be my focus. I wouldn't be the one taking cake, or maybe yes, I can take the cake, but I would tell my students you have to talk to the people. You don't have to see them as disabled elders, you know. They are people that are, some are good, some are not that good, and you have to, you know, be patient, listen to them, you know, be kind, be empathetic. It's a lot about how you treat the person, right? And how you acknowledge her or him. But I believe it's much more than just painting pictures or bringing noise, you know. That's at least what I got from my research.
Okay, we only have a few minutes left, so Suzanne, you're next.
Thank you very much. It was a very interesting conversation. I worked for some years in New York City public agencies, and I'm wondering about the organization, the agency that manages these facilities, if you've had any contact with them, or if that might not be a place of where you could kind of deal with some of the policies, some of what you've found. Have you had any communication with them?
You mean with the Lima Benevolent Society?
Yes, right.
Yeah, as I said before, I don't. It was very weird because I was doing the fieldwork there, and at the same time, the psychologist and the director of the place were looking for ways to expel me out. So I was like an intruder, and I was just able to go there through a connection. I had a friend that her tia aunt was in the board, so I was able to go through her, but they didn't want me there, so I couldn't go there and make things, you know, because I'm totally unwelcome. When I go to visit my friends, I go, you know, the least like no, I don't call attention at all, you know. I just give my ID card. Yeah, thank you. Who are you visiting? Oh, this woman. Okay, thank you. And I don't say anything.
Are they accountable to some funding source for their, you know, they must be.
No, I don't think so. I think they fund themselves.
Is it a nonprofit or what is it? Is it a government agency?
No, it's not a government agency. It's a private entity that is funded by itself, as I said, with rents, with the lottery, and with donations from wealthy people from Lima. But they don't have like a funding source, like an external funding source where you could go and see, you know. I remember when the new major came in, there was a new major that came in, and I said to him, and I thought to myself, I could go and talk to him and said to him what is going wrong in this facility so he can know and things can be better. But at the end, I wasn't able. I found out, I went actually to talk to the director of social services or something like that. And she was very like protective of her place, saying that what I saw was not really happening, or like, she didn't believe me, you know. And I understand it's complicated. It's really hard to take care of a facility with older adults or little children. It's a huge responsibility. But I don't know. I tried and it didn't work out. I don't know if I can do something in the future.
Okay, thank you, Suzanne and Carrie, and then the last one will be Bill.
Thank you. I did some field work several years ago with senior centers in Portland, Oregon, USA. And that was really very interesting. It did reflect people with some retirement resources, so it wasn't poor. But I was struck by the awareness of the elderly on matters of national, international issues. They're very alive, they're very alert. In fact, I'm thinking now of an article that a colleague, I was at the University of Papua New Guinea, which is linked to Australia, and a colleague in the Australian Journal of Psychiatry wrote an article entitled "I Am Old, But I Am," and very, very powerful. I find a certain delicious irony in that most of us that you're speaking to are also elderly here. That is, I think I'm enjoying that functional paradox. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you.
Okay, Bill. Thank you, Kerry.
I just two comments again. Thank you. And you know, some of the things you describe as I've entered my 80s, right? I'm ending towards the 80s at the end of it. And I've seen what's happened to family and others in institutions. There's a lot of similarities, right? So many of the staff here are underprepared and underpaid and overworked, right? And so a lot of it comes about because they're just overworked. And I've seen that with my brother. A friend was just telling me about her mother. They took her out of it, and this is middle class, you know, upper middle class, out of a place in Florida because they were just drugging her mother to make them quiet so that they wouldn't bother anybody, right? So again, that's all related, I think. And the other thing I just wanted to say, you mentioned somewhere about people wanting to have a meaningful life. And that goes on. We all want meaningful lives. And I think that's one of the reasons so many of us here belong to the Association of Senior Anthropologists. It's the way we can still remain meaningful in our careers and our lives. So anyway, thank you.
You're here.
Definitely.
Yes, and of course, you know, that's one of the things, Bill, that when we go to the ASA, we want to be taken, I mean, to the Toronto meetings, the AAA, we want to be taken seriously.
Absolutely.
Right? We still have a lot to offer. And there are some of the people in the younger generation that have already put us out to pasture and don't realize the great accumulated wisdom that we can bring to bear. And so, it's quite interesting. So I think, Magdalena, did you want to make one last comment? And if so, we'll have to stop.
Yes, I just wanted to thank all of you and congratulate you for having this space, as Bill said, you know, because it's a way of, there's a chapter in my dissertation that I call remaining. And it means like continue being, you know, still being, you know, despite maybe you're in a wheelchair or maybe you're taking pills for depression or whatever, you know, but I congratulate you for having this space that keeps you alive, keeps you connected, keeps you active. You know, I really wish something like this would be able to work in Peru, but the infrastructures are not possible. But it has been a pleasure to talk to you. I really enjoy this. And I must confess, I was a little scared because it's the first time I present my work like this. But thank you for your time and for your listening.
You did a nice job. Thank you.
You did a nice job. Yes, I want to.
Thank you so much.
Very, very well done, Magdalena. It was fascinating. It was just a wonderful talk. Thank you very, very much, and for doing that. And I hope we stay in touch. If you have any ideas or updates, or if you can send us some links to your articles, and I can send this on to the ASA. And I'm going to add you to our listserv so that you can see what we talk about, some of the things we get into. Okay.
Yes, that's great. That's great.
Okay, good, and hope to see you in person.
Thank you. Yeah, I hope so. Yes, and thank you for inviting me. Thank you for having me with you here.
Glad to have you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
We'll see you in January with, I think, Robert Rubenstein will be talking. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye, everybody.
Great holiday.
Thank you. Happy holidays, everyone.
Happy holidays to all.